Hi, I'm Haley Stozel, Resilience Program Director for Turning Point. To start our resilience practice series, we are going to first look at the topic of self-care. Self-care is not just the things that we do for ourselves, those little pick-me-ups in our free time. It's not just the things that cost a lot of money or time. It's the little things, the small actions that we do to care for ourselves in the moment that we need care. So that might be at work, or that might be in our roles as caregivers. And then it's also important to remember that self-care isn't just the most relaxing or easy thing to do. Think about it as the thing that you need most in that moment. For example, I might want to stay up late tonight to watch an extra couple episodes of my favorite show when what I really need is to go to bed and find a bedtime routine. Or, I might want to scroll for a long time on social media, and what I really need to do is spend some time engaging my brain in a creative way. Or let's say, I've got this difficult conversation I need to have with a family member. Instead of putting it off, like I feel like I want to do, the best thing for that relationship and for my own self-care would be to find a way to talk to that person and do it sooner rather than later. So self-care really is about doing small things that you need in the moment that you need them. And that takes a lot of self-awareness, right? But first, if you're like me, self-care can be one of those words where you have a mixed reaction when you hear it, because it has been kind of used as this magical cure-all, and that can feel kind of dismissive. There's really large systemic challenges that we face, and there's everyday stressors that we're going to come into contact with that challenge our resilience, no matter how good we are at practicing self-care, how dedicated we are to practicing self-care. So instead of thinking of self-care as a cure-all, let's kind of reframe it to a tool where we get to know ourselves better, and we get to learn the unique ways that we need to pay attention to our needs throughout the day. Because it's about checking in with ourselves throughout the day and then doing little shifts to help us navigate those stressors and those challenges as best as possible. Because we know we can't take the stress away, and there's big systemic challenges we can't impact. But when we practice self-care and we integrate it into our daily routines, we're able to cope as best as possible. And we're going to end the practice series today with a personal reflection. And we'll also talk about some ideas for self-care throughout the video. So hopefully you'll leave with a good next step for how self-care can look for you. Throughout this video series, we will be sharing resources and resilience tips from Turning Point's 10 Facets of Resilience model. Let's just start with defining the facet of self-care as engaging in health behaviors that help us balance the effects of emotional and physical stress. Now, this can include, but is definitely not limited to, things that we need to stay healthy. So regular body movement and exercise, getting enough rest, eating healthy, and definitely good sleep hygiene. So let's talk about some best practices when it comes to exercise, nutrition, and sleep. But let's also keep in mind there's definitely not a one-size-fits-all method for any of these forms of self-care. For exercise, we know from the US Department of Health and Human Services that it's more about finding the right timeframes and types of exercise than it is about getting exercise into every single day in really long periods of time. So for example, their research has shown that we need to get at least 2 hours and 30 minutes of moderate intensity aerobic exercise each week. And it does not matter what time frames those are in. We can, get that in like taking short walks, taking the stairs, finding ways to integrate exercise in small bursts throughout the week. And then if you prefer more vigorous aerobic exercise, even better news, all you need is at least 1 hour and 15 minutes of vigorous intensity exercise per week. And again, it doesn't matter what form of exercise you choose, just choose something that is appropriate for your current fitness level and something that you enjoy doing. In terms of nutrition, we are what we eat. So 70% of our immune function relies on the health of our digestive systems. And one way we can care for our digestive systems is to just try to keep a balanced diet of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and healthy proteins. And like exercise, it's important to tailor it to what you like. So you can get creative with recipes and snacks until you find healthy foods that you enjoy eating. For some best practices related to sleep, it's hard to do this every week, but when you can, try to stick to a regular sleep routine, even on your days off. It also helps to avoid caffeine, sweets, nicotine, and stressful tasks or stressful conversations close to bedtime. And then, of course, avoiding foods and large meals close to bedtime will help with heartburn and other sleep disturbing effects. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, finding a good bedtime routine is super important. This kind of trains your brain to wind down and get ready for sleep. Finally, another good recommendation is to keep a worry list. So maybe a little pad of paper right by your bed. So when you have those thoughts racing at bedtime, or you're trying to remember things that you need to do the next day, you can simply jot them down, set them aside, and trust that they're captured and you can get to them when you need to. Self-care really is a foundation for resilience. When we're low on physical, mental, and emotional energy from not being able to practice self-care, we will also feel less capacity to use other resiliency skills. So self-care gives us that energy we need to engage with other supportive skills. And there are many skills and behaviors that can kind of fall under this umbrella of self-care. Like we mentioned, there's not just good sleep, good nutrition, good exercise, but things that you see here on this list. And you'll start to notice some overlap as we go through other facets of resilience in this series. When it comes to self-care, we could really see any of these practices as ways to care for the self because they ultimately improve our well-being. Things like self-awareness, practicing compassion when we have strong emotions, asking for help, being mindful of what we consume, and then of course using supportive self-talk versus beating ourselves up or being extra hard on ourselves. And in terms of a work day and how we think about self-care at work, it can be tiny little moments, that don't take a lot of time or extra energy. They're just being more mindful and present, especially with your needs throughout the day. As we said, checking in with yourself throughout the day is a great way to think about self-care. So some examples might be you start to feel a little overwhelmed. So you might do a breathing practice, just slow down, take 3 deep breaths, and take a second to ground yourself before moving on to the next task. The same thing goes with your body, listening to your body. If you're starting to feel tight or tense or pain, it's okay to take a break, stretch, move the body, get up, and do what you need to do to relax those muscles before you keep pressing on with the rest of your day. And for those deeper check-ins, again, self-awareness is key. So if you're kind of trying to check in with yourself, you might set a reminder like every time you send an email, before you go on to the next thing, check in with yourself. How's your posture? Do you need to take a breath? Do you need some water? Do you need to get up and stretch? Is this task feeling overwhelming? Maybe you need to set some more realistic expectations for the day. Whatever it is, give yourself permission to check in with yourself and then follow through with whatever little action that you can take to support yourself in that moment. Now I want to spend a moment defining another critical aspect of self-care, which we define as self-replenishment. Self-replenishment is about doing the small things that fill up your bucket. And this includes anything that helps you restore your energy and sense of well-being when life feels extra draining. According to Rath and Clifton in their book, How Full is Your Bucket?, everyone has an invisible bucket of energy, and this energy is either constantly getting drained or refilled throughout the day. And it's important to know what our biggest bucket drainers are and also what fills us up so that we can do those small things to replace our energy throughout the day instead of waiting until we're completely on empty. Well, a good question to ask yourself is, what kinds of things do you find the most draining, either personally, work-related, or more generally? And there's a list here. So some examples might be, negativity or drama at work, financial stress. Maybe you're a caregiver both in your service role at work as well as for your family at home. You, of course, are probably managing multiple competing priorities, and this is also very draining. And then if we just come into contact with people who aren't appreciative or they're not very kind, this is super draining. Health issues or chronic pain is extremely draining. And then we all know that news and social media can be extra draining to our energy reserves as well. Now, you might have things to add to this list. This would be kind of a personal reflection that you can do to identify what are your biggest bucket drainers. And like knowing our bucket drainers, we need to know what fills us back up. So to kind of reflect on this, you might ask yourself, what are the types of interactions that I have, or some of the activities that I like that help restore my sense of self and my energy? So that might be sharing some laughs with your friends or your coworkers. It might be asking people about their favorite things and talking about your favorite things. It might be giving some compliments or some supportive feedback to a coworker. It might be finding ways to kind of integrate fun things into otherwise not so fun tasks, whether that's the dishes or other chores. You might watch a video or listen to music, or on your commute to work, you might listen to a podcast. Gratitude is also a huge bucket filler. So you can think of things that you're grateful for each day, or perhaps things that you're proud of that you contributed. And it's also fun to share those gratitudes with your coworkers, friends, and family. And then, of course, spending time outdoors or exercising or doing any of the other things we've talked about that fill you up. And everyone's different. So your strategies for self-replenishment should be personal and speak to your interests, your values, your needs, and of course, your personality. As promised, we are going to wrap up this video with some deeper self-reflection and getting to know our self-care needs a little bit better. And we're going to start with a mindfulness practice and kind of a self-reset moment. I'm going to ask you to reflect on a time where you actually were able to engage in some form of self-care that felt really good to you. And we're not talking about the spa treatment type of self-care. We're talking about something you did in an everyday situation that you felt really good about and that made you feel like, yeah, I'm caring for myself. This is a self-care moment. So I want you to first just call that experience to mind. So you might note what actions you were taking that made that feel like a moment of self-care. Just call that whole experience to mind. And now I want you to focus on the feelings. So taking it a little bit deeper, not just the sensations of what was going on, but how did that experience make you feel on the inside? You might have had a feeling of relaxation or peace or pride because you were setting a good boundary, or maybe stepping away to de-stress a little bit. So you had that sense of relaxation or peace, maybe a little bit of boost of confidence. Maybe your self-care moment was some self-talk. So you felt competent, you felt cared for. Really call to mind whatever emotions were attached to that self-care moment. You might have even felt energy. Maybe you got a little bit of boost of energy from whatever you were engaging with. Okay, and finally, I'm going to ask you to reflect on what it is that you think you need to give yourself permission to do so that you can have more self-care moments like these in the future. These everyday moments where you're caring for the self. What is it that you need? So you might think on, is there something I need to let go of? Kind of set aside to carve out space for self-care moment. So it could be something you need to let go of. It could be something you need to give yourself permission to do. It could be, a conversation that you need to have with someone else. It could be some pressure that you've been putting on yourself that you need to readjust your expectations and set more realistic goals for yourself. Think of one thing that you can do that will help you access a self-care moment like this in the future. And to wrap up, let's give ourselves some credit, because finding time for self-care is hard, but it is doable, especially if we think of self-care not as a luxury, but as a necessity and as the foundation for our resiliency. These videos are made possible by the partnership between WorkWell Kansas, Turning Point, and the Masonic Cancer Alliance. Please see the following slides for more information about these organizations.